Hello, hello. Welcome everybody to the next community campfire. Thank you for joining Sahana and I. We've done it a little bit agile. You know, we're in a collapsing world. It's volatile, it's emergent, it's exciting. So that's what we thought we'd make the opening today, Sahana. So we're going to start off with your wonderful introduction, if we may, today.
Thank you, Gary, and welcome everyone. So here we are, 4 billion years of evolution later, we are at a cusp, a point of transition. We are nearing planetary collapse. Species are vanishing at an alarming rate. The narrative running the show no longer makes sense. It's become obsolete. And we have to collectively weave new narratives, multiple narratives that reflect the many truths of a spectacularly diverse planet. Stories that spring from realities beyond the human as well. And in this phase of planetary collapse, we believe organizations have unique roles to play. Unshackled from the old machine metaphor, organizations are living systems, spaces for thriving and flourishing. They are imaginal cells carrying the codes of metamorphosis, if we allow them to be. Instead, we often drown in arbitrary complexities, man made, and I'm using the word man a little consciously and deliberately. Arbitrary complexities abound, making it difficult to see the reality, to see the interconnectedness that exists, to see where we are all headed and where we can reimagine ourselves to be. In this conversation, we will be partaking of that emergence, of that reimagination, of our collective weaving of narratives together. Welcome to this community campfire. Thank you. You're mute. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. This is modern day technology. Gary's on mute. We will see you in literally 30 seconds. We'd love for you to visually see the 4 human beings that are about to go exploring together. We'd love to introduce you to Heather and Farzin shortly. So let's bring Heather and Farzin into the space. How are you, Heather, first of all, and how is Farzin?
I'm really good. It's a nice clear day, nice climate. Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation.
Same for me. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. I think providing the platform to have this conversation is huge for me, and it's a nice wrap up to a very complex week. So.
But what we thought might be interesting as we get going would be maybe if we just done a quick round as we get just to start. Like, what does this topic mean to each of us from our context? Because if I think about my context, chemicals industry, then you've got your context, Heather, etc. It'd be really interesting just to start, maybe just weaving those different perspectives together, if that sounds okay. And then we could go into an open, intuitive exploration after that. So maybe if I can throw it to yourself, Sahana, and then just pick someone after you've shared,
Okay.
and we'll just go around, do a quick round, and then we'll go exploring. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I mentioned the phrase arbitrary complexity, and this was actually something I heard from Farzin. So I love that because it's so neatly encapsulated a lot of my experiences in the corporate world where I've spent more than 18 years. And what do I mean by that? For me, it means complexity without seeing the interconnectedness, arbitrariness in a kind of a blinkered fashion, where we approach complexity with a sense of trying to make it predictable, trying to make the uncertain certain, not taking into consideration the interconnectedness required, the sense of the pattern seeking sense required, the ability to do systems thinking that is so necessary. Instead, we approach complexity like we try to take it apart. We try to take it apart piece by piece, piecemeal in organizations. And models and frameworks and consulting companies thrive on those taking apart of complexities and putting it back together in different shapes and forms across different departments, so that what is actually an interconnected, systemic, I wouldn't even call it an issue or a challenge, but a systemic narrative gets distorted and distributed across different departments, with everyone getting a piecemeal picture, and six blind men trying to feel an elephant happens. So instead of really wholeness in our thinking, we apply this extremely reductiveness, and that, I would say, is the root cause of complexity being layered upon complexity, being layered upon complexity. Ultimately, we've lost sight of the actual beginning of the narrative that led to that, that whole mess. And what happens is literally lipstick on a pig all the time, and nothing gets resolved. So this arbitrariness needs to be taken out, and the wholeness needs to be seen in an interconnected context of a living, thriving system, not a machine. An organization is not a machine. That's my initial take. Farzin.
That was wonderful, Sahana, and I completely are on the same page with a lot with everything that you're saying. Essentially, I'm gonna kind of jump back in a different direction. So and tell you exactly why I've been so excited for this conversation. Everybody kind of who knows me as a systems thinker, right? Like I think big picture, I think from outside in, and so the past few weeks, I've come to this revelation or like realization that throughout my academic and into my work journey, into my labor journey, and doing this work in my consultancy and stuff, and I've kind of gotten so lost essentially in the systemic, right? I've we don't talk about that enough in the United States, I don't think, in big picture collective space, like knowledge. So it was kind of for me an overcompensation, like systems, right? And so get that out there. And then I noticed over time, like, what about me specifically and how I relate to this system? So arbitrary complexity for me is a deeply personal kind of relationship with society, right? It's born out of a frustration, out of too much input, too much complexity, too many layers, too many things that are specifically happening to me, and I have to be in touch with that as well. And that's one thing that I think over time that while like no, I'm still a systems thinker. I still think in these connections, but like one thing I really wanted to emphasize also was that don't not to get lost into that, to the point where, hey, you're a person and you have this relationship as well, and we can create societies where I'm not and anybody else isn't feeling this like overwhelmed feeling in these systems that are both on a very, very bad direction to where civilization is going, and also at the same time just like it's also too much. It's right, like not enough and too much, right? So so that's where I kind of wanted to, where I was really excited about this, is to kind of relate it back to ourselves as well. Like we're part of these systems, we're part of the oppression of these systems, and we have stake in creating better outcomes for ourselves, for our loved ones, children, society, kin, etc. Toss it back over to Heather.
Thank you. Yeah, I too like looking at it not just from an organizational perspective, because of the interconnections. It's not just about organizations, and it is about how we look at the news and we feel that overwhelm, and we know that we're in a space that doesn't make sense, that we're not able to respond appropriately to what's happening in the world because we're forced to be thinking about how we're going to make money, kids in school, etc. And so this complexity that serves a very, very tiny percentage of the population of the world. And it keeps them rich and wealthy. And it's not in their best interests to respond appropriately to what's happening to us as individuals. And so we see the suffering continue, and we see, we're about to go into COP 27 in Egypt, and I don't know who possibly could still have faith in this process. We see that it doesn't work, and it's that, keep banging your head against the wall. And we see the impact of that in the kind of climate actions that are taking place, which, not everyone's doing that, but the ones that are getting a lot of publicity right now show a kind of desperation and non-strategic thinking going on, because people are acting out of the fear and desperation, which means that their nervous systems aren't regulated enough to think about the complexity and how to strategize appropriately to what's going on, and to keep demanding things from a state and from a government, particularly the US government, the UK government. We see the corruption. We see that they're not putting the interests of the people at the heart of everything they do. And so it's a failure of democracy. It's a failure of capitalism. And so this arbitrary complexity means that we can't focus on what we need to do because of the overwhelm and the way that the system is set up, where we feel like we won't be able to survive without the system. And so we're locked in to the everyday pressures. Garry?
Wow. I'm just, because I've learned so much. As anybody that knows me, like this for me is literally being in a sweet shop again. Like having Heather Farzin and Sahana in dialogue is just like, oh my God. So that's my first little fanboy moment. But when it comes to arbitrary complexity for me, so as I say, I work in the chemicals industry, and it's taken me a few years, as Heather knows very personally, and as Sahana know in particular. Part of this for me was, I am a bad person. My identity for a long time was, oh my God, I've realized my place. I'm in a sector that is causing harm. It is very extractive. Almost like I've got to be more like that then, because that's my identity. I couldn't hold I had to go one way or the other, that binary thinking, right? And that for a couple of years was really quite a tension. It's only been the last 12 months, really 18 months, that I'm starting to see past it. And as I start to see past it, of course, I start to see those mental models that keep the current system in place. So for me, this arbitrary complexity is very much, and a lot of your work around patterns and the work you've done with me, Heather, it's literally at 1,000,000 decibels at the moment, because at this very moment, I can tell you, in big corporate, they and we are still talking about growth as being a solution. Like that complete inability or willingness to go, hang on, to even sense something below the neck that says, that surely cannot live with that. Okay, I'm all for complexity, but that growth thing, how does that live with all of this? And then, of course, it comes to right to comfort, it comes to fear, it comes to what do I have to give up? And I'm just wondering, and this will be part of our chat today, I'm sure, but I'm really hoping that anyone that watches this or even just gets a bit curious just really allows themselves to feel below the neck, because that's what I was missing for so long in the West, was that there's these 3 data centers, not just the one in our head. And I'm really curious as to how that integration, sort of head, heart, gut, how is that helpful for the next part of this journey of whatever will emerge following what must be collapse? And I think, Heather, I'd love to, I wouldn't mind actually putting it back to you just for a moment, if I may, Heather, because you really gave me an insight and a half quite recently when I said to you, my God, it really feels like the West is collapsing. And you said to me, yeah, well, it's been going on somewhere else for a very long time. I just wondered if you wouldn't mind just building that as an extra seed as we go exploring. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so societies have been collapsing, for so long. And so there are people alive right now who already experienced collapse. And there are people who are experiencing it now. And we might be part of that, depending on your definition of what collapse is. And in fact, even looking at indigenous people thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago even, would look at what we do today, the kind of people that sit at a computer and do Zoom calls, they would see this as dystopia, that we are so disconnected from people, from nature, from the land. And yet we as this type of people now, fear losing this. And we fear a different kind of dystopia, which is a way of living that the majority of people around the world live now. Not having access to, stable internet for one, but go further to clean water, to functioning, so-called public services. And so it's not to make people feel guilty about this, because we've been raised in this society. It's more about, like you say, it's the body and the nervous system, and that the thought of us losing this kind of, Starbucks, Apple way of life. I'm guilty, 100% guilty of this as well. The thought of losing that sends our nervous system into panic, and then we're unable to see that that there's another way, that we don't actually need this system to have a good life. And what's missing is that we don't have relationships with people who don't benefit from the system. And the more that we can be in relationship with those people, not only will we use our power and privilege to support them more, because it will feel painful that they don't have what they need, but the more that we will be able to see that actually there's another way to live, and we don't have to be so afraid of losing the system, which needs to happen if we want there to be any kind of life on the planet.
Can I jump in and add to that? I think I love everything that's that's being shared here. I'm ready to pop here. I think one of the things that I've always thought, and I don't really see it being discussed, and it's, kind of alluding to what was shared, is that in my perception of that encompasses this whole, like, living in a type of comfort that's just like arbitrary, right? Like we have needs in the global north that are they actually human needs? No, we're used to them. We're used to the comfort, and then somebody told us we need that, and then now we need it, right? And then on the other hand, like, where we've we've placed our power to those who lead us, or deciding, certain things that society needs that isn't encompassing. So I think the main, and I don't usually think in terms of binary as much as I used to. I try and, but there is one thing that I have been thinking a lot in terms of binary, and it is that our current global North-led world order, particularly European led world order, is in a way where this idea of central planning and emergent thought are so out of line, right? Are so imbalanced, and there's too much of both, right? They don't work in harmony with each other. So what I mean by that is that we can design if they were in balance, we could design a society where we allocate resources to where they need to go to perpetuate human functioning on our balance with in the environment and society, but also not be so myopic that certain kinds of things like new ways of being and new ways of living are completely negated, right? That emergence is necessary. We can't completely plan everything out, right? We need some some type of like space for collective sort of gathering and saying, hey, this isn't working for us, let's try this, right? So, and then for me, like, as you read all of these, like, what's wrong with civilization today, Thomas Piketty, and like, why, like, income, inequity and all these imbalances that exist and how we got here, I think it's because of this imbalance between central planning and emergent thought, right? Like, I think that when it boils down to it, like, those who are supposed to be entrusted with creating a civilization or perpetuating a civilization that's supposed to not harm, are falling into cahoots with those who have emergent thought, but that emergent thought is self-serving. And so, like, corporate ends up overwhelming governance, and you have these extractive models that continue to kind of extract and exploit every manner of our lives, right? And so, like, my appeal is start over, like, almost, right? Or like at least figure out ways to deconstruct our reality and reimagine, because we can't continue living like this. Because, like, I'm back to the personal level, you look at I'm sitting watching the news, seeing all this like debates happening, and it's so surface level, like political debates, and it's so surface level. It's not nowhere near where we need to be, and central planning is failing us. And then emergent thought is, oh, here's a new company that just popped up that's going to AI in order to kind of fix our things, and then it's just another thing and another thing on top of that, and like that doesn't work, so we need solutions for that, and then just layers and layers and layers. And so, like, there's no balance. Emergent thought is going one way, central planning is going another way, and it's just at odds. And that's supposed to be the inherent contradiction in capitalism that creates better outcomes, this competition. But it is completely destroying us, right? We can emergent thought should be in service of humanity, and central planning should be in the service of humanity. And the central planning, I think, shouldn't be in the service of capital and corporate interests and these things that are kind of creating these arbitrary layers of complexity and human needs that aren't really human needs, but somebody told us they were just so they could sell a product to us, right? So that, I think, like, we need to find that balance. We need to rein it in. We need to find that balance, like, give space for conversations, new ways of being, sharing culture, sharing life and identity and all these things, but also we do have to collectively sit down and say, here are the values we're going to kind of prop up, and these are shared among like most people globally, and sustainability, communal kind of living arrangements or anything like that, and then stick to that, right? So that sort of duopoly is what I've been thinking about a lot.
I guess I would challenge us to notice that there's not going to be any kind of collective sitting down and looking at our values. We're just not there. And like the kind of hope for a new movement, for an awakening, you know, we're not there. And it's not going to happen. And I don't mean to say that in a despairing way, you know, like not like, okay, let's end the conversation and just go do something else. I'm saying that we need to look seriously at what we're up against as people who care about one another, as people who want to take care of one another, as people who want to keep each other as safe as possible. What do we need to do in this moment, given that there are the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks out there who are, you know, they're on the spectrum of fascism, clearly. And there are people suffering for that now, and suffering for all kinds of, you know, for capitalism, for all of this. What do we do now? And this, when you talk of emergent thought, I would see that more as that needs to happen locally. What makes sense in a local context, and about protecting water, protecting food, protecting health in a local way, but not ignoring international. So those of us with power and privilege need to be supporting the people on the front lines who are in the big fights around the mines, oil terminals, you know, fracking, all of that. And this is so uncomfortable for us because we want to somehow stay in a space where it's like about ideas and, you know, having conversations, when the real work needs to happen on the ground with our neighbors, with the people we live around, because there's going to be more and more crises. You know, it's really warm in the UK today. Now, I'm coming to you from Colombia in South America, and the weather's just been totally normal. So I'm in this bubble, but I know what's happening over there because my context is still very UK based. And it's terrifying for people how warm it is. And so you've got that going on along with the cost of living crisis, energy bills, because it won't stay that warm. You know, people will need to put their heating on again. And so it's, if we don't get good at how to build relationships with people around these crises that are happening now, you know, we don't have a right to talk about the future in that way. But at the same time, I have friends in Nigeria who spend their whole day looking for water. What does that mean to us? This is a friend, not just some statistic. Like, what do we do from where we are right now so that she has water? And I don't want us to get, you know, lost in words, you know, because this requires action. What do we need to move out of the way in order to make their responses, like what they know they need to do to get water? Who's in the way of that? And that's where I think we come in with our power and privilege to remove those barriers for them so that they can have the emergent, not just thinking, but action into what needs to happen for them to survive. But this is going to increasingly affect us. So we need to, so if we start thinking about them, it'll help us in our thinking about us. And then we'll have much less of a binary us versus them, because we'll feel, you know, that we're all in this together. We are all in this together. There are other people in the world, they are not thinking like that. And this is a fact. And so we have to be really clear, like around anti-fascism and being ready to protect people around us who are targeted by fascism, and like the refugees arriving and all of that. You know, this is real on the ground work.
Let me pose a question. So this is one thing that I'm still straddling and trying to figure out. And I think Heather, what you've mentioned, like, I mean, it is absolutely beautiful, and I totally agree in that it's action related. It's like what's real versus like, you know, we can get lost in thought, right? Like, you know, we have, there has to be a huge element of do, like we're done through the liberation phase. My question though is, and I think this kind of speaks to our specific backgrounds, is like, can we, when you talk about moving people out of moving Nestle, who's going around buying, you know, aquifers, and, you know, Rumsfeld was doing that for a while. I don't know if we're still doing that as a U.S. government policy, but like, if we're talking about moving that obstruction out of the way to kind of give space for communal power and societal power outside of the global north, can that be done as an emergent thing, or does it need a coordinated, deliberate, structured effort or a movement globally to be able to do that, right? Can, like, you know, Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion or all these groups in the global north emerge and then kind of, you know, do their own thing, or does it really require like collective on a global, not just collective in like 20, 30 people, but collective on a global scale to reimagine how we do things across the world? Because you know, if you like working in like any sort of international development, you're like, okay, we want to do this, but there's all of these things like you know, that financial capital from the West won't allow us to do, right? And so a lot of countries have no choice but to play the rules of the capitalist structure, the world order, to be able to quote liberate themselves. But it's not true liberation. It's like a freeing of some form of debt, right? But it's not true liberation. It's still you're playing into the structures, and you replicate the disparities that exist globally in a local level. And you have, like, you know, the kingmakers, and you have the rest of society, kind of thing. So my question, I think, is like, as we think about this arbitrarily complex system that we've designed, global financial capital, you know, confiscation of resources, or exploitation and theft of resources all around the world, can we do that in several emergent nodes, or does it require some sort of formal structure to break it? Is what, you know, I don't know the answer to that. So
I think that there's a way that people do, like, to stay in comfort, do want to say that it needs to be something coordinated and global, because then it's like, well, I can't possibly be the person that does that. And it's going to be emergent in the sense that you don't know what will happen. And so this is like the uncertainty, and Sahana did speak of uncertainty, and that feels really uncomfortable to be in that, like, well, what if what I do doesn't work? And if it was collective, I feel like it would be more, like if it was globally collective, I feel like it would be more certain, like there'd be momentum and it would happen. But we're not going to have that certainty. And so it is about networking, though. So we need more connections with people internationally so that we know what's going on. But these aren't going to be on Twitter, you know, they're not going to be on LinkedIn. You know, people aren't going to go, here's how I'm undermining Nestle, you know. So we have to, so it's like what we start doing locally and we start having conversations with people doing things around the world, it will be networked. It can be networked, but it won't be a visible collective movement because that would probably be dangerous. You know, it would get shut down, more likely get shut down. And so it's like the messy kind of complex approach. And people don't like that, you know, it's so uncomfortable, you know, and you didn't ask like where you start, but a lot of people that I work with do ask, well, where do I start? And that leaving the comfort zone of going out to on the ground locally to work with the people who do not benefit from the capitalist system is difficult, you know, to get people off the screen, for one thing. And so something that I suggest is that we create affinity groups online with like-minded people to do the political education we need, like kind of what we're doing right now, and then challenge one another to leave the house and to go do the organizing or the relationship building, really, with people who we don't normally spend time with. And then come back to that virtual group and say how hard it was. And say how uncomfortable we felt. But then challenge one another to keep doing it and to build from there. And that will be emergent. And we're not certain where it will go. But our nervous systems need to be able to see that we're making an impact every day, a material impact on people's lives. And this will affect our nervous system and make us able to think more complexly about what is going on. And then we can strategize, and it won't be us. Like it's not on us. We need to hear from the people most affected and back their leadership. But they won't trust us to tell us anything until we prove that we want to be in relationship with them. And so it's hard because people want everyone wants an easy answer to this. And that's why fascism is so seductive and we're vulnerable to it, because there are people who know that we're scared and will say, I've got a solution to offer you. And I'll dress it up in a way that looks like it's okay because it's protecting the status quo and our way of life. But in reality, it's sacrificing the rest of humans and ecosystems on the planet. So it's dangerous times, but we're humans were made for complexity. Our brains are good. Our nervous systems are getting in the way.
Sahana, I saw that you came off mute. Did you have something to add?
I mean, a number of thoughts. So thank you. That was I totally align with what you, Farzin, and you and Heather have been saying. And I'm just trying to sort of put myself in that place. Also, why? Because coming from the global south, and here's a little bit of a personal experience. I traveled to the US for the first time maybe 17, 18 years back, or 15, 16, something like that. And the first thought that struck me was, and I'd gone visiting a friend, and I was staying at a hotel. I was working with a client. The first thought that struck me there was, oh my God, there's a machine for everything. There's a machine for making coffee. There's a machine for drying your hair. There's a machine for sweeping the floor. There's a machine for, I mean, everything. And I was like, why? Isn't it just simpler to put a pot of water on the stove to boil and make your tea? That's how we do it here. And it took me like a while, a great deal of time to figure out how that coffee machine worked. So after a point, I was just like, it's easier to have some chilled orange juice, just straight from the fridge. And so those thoughts would, and every time I went walking out, and I would see all kind of bizarre gadgets that I couldn't figure out what they were used for. And that was my first impression. And like going from here to Boston and New York was overwhelming with all its glitter and gloss and the Empire State Building and all of that. And so the streets were fantastic. It's clean and everything, but everything felt, to me at least then, like overly what's the word? Overly sanitized, that everyone was running to some kind of clock that I could not see. And everyone was rushing. At least that's what the sense I got. And I wondered why. The fall colors, the leaves were beautiful. No one stopped to look at the lovely fall colors of the leaves, whether in Boston or New York. And I was like, why are they rushing? Okay, office, you need to reach office on time. I get that. Weekends also, I didn't see too many people stopping to, and I would just be meandering around over the weekends when I wasn't with my client, Saturdays, Sundays, just watching the fall colors. And so that whole thing of, and then I would tell my client, why do you all have a machine for everything? And he would really laugh. He was like, yeah, let me introduce you to some more. And so that was my first impression. In India, where I am now, I'm in one of the largest cities of India, Mumbai, which is India's financial capital. We get power cuts every day. And I'm in the capital, okay? And we get power cuts every day. So I remember some years back, I think there was this concept of Earth Day where you switch off the light for an hour or something like that. I said, if they tell this to anyone in India, they will get slapped in the face. We anyways have power cuts for 4 hours every day. If you are, and in villages, there are no electricity any which ways. There's no question of switching off the light. There is no light. Okay, in many villages, women still lose babies from miscarriages from carrying buckets of water, pots of water on their head over long distances. There are women who climb down step wells, which are some 40, 50 feet deep, just to fetch water while heavily pregnant. I don't even know how they do it. They will defy any Russian gymnasts or whatever. So I think, and of course, we can go back to this whole system. And on the other hand, just down the street from here, which used to be like a tiny tea shop, which I used to love going to, just a little tea shop with in India we call them stalls, with a little bit of shade, and you could just stand there, have a little pot of tea. And the pots here, olden days, used to be made of terracotta clay, which you could just break and they would just melt in the water. So no residue, no plastic, nothing. So that tea shop is now McDonald's. That doesn't exist anymore. Okay, and down the road I have a Starbucks, and I have all the brands. And honestly, I wish they weren't this close to my house. I just wish they weren't, but they are. So what I'm saying is there is this huge dichotomy of brands and people visiting them, Though they are not overly crowded after COVID. People have lost their jobs, they can't afford those places. But on the other hand, there is this absolute poverty, there is this lack, this scarcity, whatever. But a lot of it, like Heather had said, Farzin has said, comes from the system that has been created. And fascism is an easy answer. It's a us versus them answer. The enemies out there, they are the enemies. Now the enemies could be anyone, the Muslims, the Dalits in India, it could be anyone. It could be racism, all are different facets of fascism. And here is one savior who has the answer and who will drag you out of it and keep you safe and at the cost of others. So you have to have an enemy to blame. And what happens in the process is humanity is lost, innate humanity, because you're pitting people against people, neighbor against neighbor, relationships are broken. The interconnectedness that we should be seeing is lost. In spite of all this, like last year, we had one of the largest movements in the history of the farmers in the world, the farmers' movement in India. 800 farmers lost their lives preventing or protecting their land from corporate takeover, from industrialization of agriculture, which is happening all over the globe anyway, from monoculture. Sudha Bharadwaj, a very, very well known social activist come lawyer in India, was in jail for 2 years and she's out on parole. She's Dr. Sudha Bharadwaj. She gave up her American citizenship to come back to India to work with the tribal Adivasis. Adivasis are people who are from the region, tribes, to prevent their land from being taken over for mining. And she spent 2 years in jail for that. And she's just out on parole. She has not been released. Numerous journalists are in jail for speaking up on behalf of, the people, the ordinary people, the poor people. So what is happening, like Heather said, is kind of a takeover of the government and the politics by a handful of the Elon Musks and their ilk. Now, what we have concentrated in the hands of 26 people, that's the data, or whatever, let's make it 50 people, they are ruling the world. So that is where all the central planning is happening, literally. And what we are facing, that's the 50 people ruling a world of 7 billion extremely diverse, extremely distributed set of humans and another 70 billion non-humans controlled by 50 people. And what we are facing is the trickle-down impact of that. So capitalism used to speak a lot about trickle-down economy and trickle-down effect and trickle-down this and trickle-down that and free market. What we forget is free market was never free because capitalism always protected the interest of the few. So it was never really free. It was a very protected market in the guise of free market. A very protected few given the leeway and the freedom to extort, exploit, and expropriate from wherever they chose. Now, what has happened is there's no point going back and repeating and blaming. And what Heather said about movements happening in pockets is true. Like the farmers' movement happened, like what happened in Myanmar, like what's happening in little pockets across the globe. How do they? So they're like nodes, lit up nodes across the globe. And Paul Hawken, I think, called them movement of movements, with no real, not a single leader, not a leader that you see. They kind of emerge from the local context of that place and time and context, and they coalesce together, drawing more and more people into their fold. The thing is, how do these then sustain? How do the future narratives arise from these movements? And how do those narratives then topple this single narrative dreamed up by a handful of Europeans, influenced by Hayek and Friedman, running the show today? How do these multiple narratives, and we need multiple narratives, in a distributed, diverse, very, I would still call it an abundant planet if we allow it to be. So how do these multiple narratives that give birth to these multiple, mega meta narratives, which topple the very man-made narrative that's running the show for maybe a couple of centuries? And that, I would say, again, I have no answer, more questions than answers. But that's where I think what Heather and Farzin said about emergence and central planning being in contradiction and contradistinction, really, that's how they exist.
And can I quickly add to both of your points? I love this conversation. I totally agree about emergent nodes. I think that people are, reclaiming power away from these systems. But one thing that, Heather talked about this a little bit, but like one thing that I would definitely highlight is this notion that it cannot be through the main power structures that currently exist, right? If you do have an environmental movement from the imperial core, it's always going to be myopic. It's always going to be, a very, very specific viewpoint and negate everyone else on the planet, right? And so it has to be justice led. It has to be global South led. It has to be from those who have been completely robbed of their identities, their resources, their land, and face multiple forms of oppression that they're trying to reclaim their, connection to the past, connection to their ancestry, plus have a vision for the future. It has to be that way. That's why I'm, like these ideas of, my frame of thinking is always the caution, the worry about co-option. Like, okay, so we're in the system of power. We like what you say. We're going to adopt like 25% of that, and then the rest of it, whatever. And that's what happens all the time. Happens in our organizations. Happens in global movements. So how we don't. I wish we had like another 100 years to kind of deliberate on this, right? And find some sort of camaraderie across the planet. But we need to figure out, things to do in the moment quickly. If that's emergence from global South overwhelming the power structures, if that's possible, that's, I think for me, I think all of us is ideal. But we also, I think, like at some point have to realize that to both your points about these global networks, we have to share this kind of thought and find some degree of, hey, let's all do this at a similar time to be able to overwhelm that system, right? So as the structures of power aren't able to isolate the Indian farmers movement, for example, and then that's the direction that they're like, the focus is on, get through this and then quell another thing and then quell another thing. And so it definitely has to be continuously emergent and active and, action oriented, I guess. So I think there's a common theme there.
Yeah, I would say that networking will be emergent, so just as long as we don't wait for how are the farmers going to communicate with we don't wait for that, and we start our work now without a sense of urgency that overwhelms our nervous system, but instead through a sense of no time like the present, and relaxed and intelligently building relationships, so that, because we can't see the system for what it is because we benefit from it too much. And so building those relationships, hearing, even Sahana talking about what it's like in India, is always like startling thing for people in the global north to hear. And so it's staying in those relationships with people, building new ones, but having the relationships with the people closest to us as well, and other like-minded people like on this call, to keep building. You know, those are like foundational places that we just keep moving from, returning to, and challenging each other when we get too comfortable.
I'd love to add, if I may, Heather, such a beautiful point. So for me, I'm going to bring this super practical for people that may be watching this live or watching it back. So Farzin, when you opened, it really struck me because I've definitely been stuck in that. Like, I'm very privileged, of course, but grateful to be able to sense systemically, join dots. I'm always the outcast. I'm always 8 years ahead of everyone in the corporate role, you know, blah, blah, blah. I thought it was a bad thing till recently. And now I've realized I found my misfits. It's like, oh, it's not a bad thing. But where I'm going with this is I was so obsessed and focused on just the big picture. I didn't even know what was happening in my back garden. Like, literally, not metaphorically. Like, I've never grown my own food until this year. And the joy of growing tomatoes and blueberries and seeing how long it takes for that process, I think that's been such a critical learning for me this year, because now I'm viewing my big picture stuff with more, I'm holding it with more care in a way. So rather than just wanting to bludgeon it, which I could do, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. It depends on the context, right? You might need to do that. But from where I'm sitting with privilege, I really feel the need that I've got to do that inner work, right? Right. I've got to understand why I've got the privilege in the first place. And then and this is my biggest point. Heather, something you just spoke to really, really impacted me as well, because I think in the last 12 months, I've reached a point in my own experience of life where it's now more painful for me to stay silent, than it is to carry on with the life that I used to know. I've got the same wife, I've got the same job, I've been in the same friendship groups. Like, none of the external view looks any different. But my inside, I am now in much more pain to stay and walk in the opposite direction to what I now know is true. And I'm just wondering, as we go into maybe like the last 10, 15 minutes, I'm wondering about that pain threshold. There seems, for me, my own life anyway, I've had to come up against that. I've had to experience being in more pain, staying in the status quo, to get active about justice, to get active about equity. And I can't tell you when it happened. I can't tell you what the combination of factors were, but certainly the last 12 months, I'm now physically and mentally in more pain if I think for a second about not trying to do something. I don't know if that resonates or not, but like, I just wanted to share a very personal anecdote of how, by me going more local and looking globally, so like global perspective, but really starting to do that local work, that's definitely opened up my ability to sense into that, whatever that pain threshold was for me. So yeah, bit of a ramble, but I hope there's something that might be interesting as we pop into the last sort of quarter of an hour or so.
Yeah, I think it's important that we are aware of our feelings and what we're experiencing. When we can name them really well, then we're creating, the space for them not to overwhelm us. And so we need spaces where we can share the pain and mourn the fact that it's taking, extra energy, extra whatever to go in the direction that we know is right. And then but we don't get stuck there, that we have our spaces to feel and to share those feelings. And then we remember that, it's our responsibility to do something. Because some people can get stuck in the guilt, shame. And my approach is always, we don't need to go there. The guilt and the shame aren't useful. And instead it's being able to look clearly, name clearly, and take full responsibility, but not doing it alone, because that's overwhelming. And we're social animals. We all know that. And we're not very good at it anymore. So we need to, be gentle with one another, but challenge.
I mean, I totally agree. I'm kind of in that. Like, I haven't figured out a good way of doing these things either. Like, it's a deeply somatic experience to kind of go and start a line of doing some projects that are actually like meaningful and doing, like, from gardening to spending time with family to your work and volunteering and stuff like that, and then go down that path and then realize, oh no, like, I'm still beholden to capitalism. I still have responsibilities, all these things, and then kind of veer off a little bit. And then when you hit that veer off and you're like, I'm contributing back to oppression again, like oppressive systems. And then there's that cognitive dissonance between where you're hoping to go and where you're veering off to. And I hold it in my body and then I snap at it, right? Everything is bullshit. Like I'm going to, it's a deeply angry and depressing feeling, right? And so I haven't myself figured out how to kind of hold that space and be like, look, this is the nature of reality that we live in. If I don't do these things, I have responsibilities to other people, like my child, for example, like, right. But also I do want to do good work, and finding that nexus is extraordinarily difficult, and it's part of the complexity, right? Like, it's part of this system of complexity. We can create a society where these two things align, where our purpose and our work and everything is in service of each other and service of humanity. But we've created that complexity where we have to be in service of capital to survive, but also try and break that, right? It's a lot for a person. And that's why I think, like, to Heather's point, like, these networks are very important, as collectives, or like, like finding those connections and moving forward, both for the movement and for your own mental health, right? So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. This is not something one can do alone, or even should attempt to do alone. Also, and the more I kind of think about it, I left the corporate world not because at that point I wasn't, honestly, to be very honest, I wasn't thinking about capitalism and that organization's alignment with anything of that sort. It was me. It was me and my internal, like Farzin said, a deeply somatic response to a context that I could not handle. I felt almost a hand pushing me back every time I went inside. It was just me, nothing else to do with anything else. The organization is really a good one, a fantastic one, a well-known one, and people inside are very good. It was just me, and I could not, and I can't even explain why, at what point it started. But that point arrived when I could no longer play a role inside an organization and be another person outside without literally becoming schizophrenic. So I had to give one thing up. I had to, if I had to be true to myself, I had to give up this role I was playing. And it felt very fake to me and hypocritical, because after a point towards the end, I realized I wasn't playing that role well. I was doing it half-heartedly, and I was kind of cheating myself and the organization. So I had to be in alignment with something and someone, and I chose me. And when I walked out, it wasn't thinking about any big picture and systems and changing the world and justice, nothing. I had to first be with myself, to be honest with myself. In hindsight and in retrospective, after 6 years, I realized that I was bumping up against the system with my own beliefs and values, which were not quite aligning. And that constant bump and rub was sort of sharpening my inner misalignment with the system outside. And that's what I guess, when Farzin said it's a very individual response. It begins with me, with you, from inside. And then it kind of spreads outward, and we get drawn into networks and webs and woven together with like-minded, like-hearted people who are on the same path. I wouldn't say it's doing maybe even exactly the same thing, but when I say same path, I mean, all yearning for a world, for a planet where life is thriving, where this constant overwhelm doesn't exist, where we um, don't have to bow down to a system that doesn't really have anything to offer us. So that's the bigger yearning. But each of us are defining our own pathways with our own little tribes, and finding that tribe, I guess, requires each one of us to again align inside before I can find someone outside to align. And at least that's been my personal journey.
I'm just like, when you're like, I said to Farzin and Heather, probably 30, 45 minutes. I'm like, oh dear, whoops, 66. But at the end of the day, this is something I also want to, again, so joking apart, we probably do need to go to a wrap up, check out, just to honor each person's space and time, energy, whatever you call it. But I just want to say thank you all for just modeling the dissolving of arbitrary complexity. Because even for me, at 45 minutes, my conditioning straight away, partly conditioning, was like, shit, I need to drop a message. Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? Because they've got things to be doing. Instead of trusting that actually we're all adults. And like, if one of us has got to jump, we're going to say, I've got to jump, right? But even during this conversation, I've had that moment of like, oh my God, actually, I need to do something quick because I need to be in control of this situation. So it's also a noticing for me. That's what's come up for me during this conversation. It's just noticing these little patterns and just trying to catch them. So that's my checkout. Maybe that's my invitation. It's just like a little checkout. Maybe if we just go around and just, what maybe have you been reminded of or even learned through this last 66 minutes for yourself and for where we're going next. So thank you, all of you, Farzin, Heather and Sahana, for helping me notice those patterns again today, because that's been really, really helpful. And I think very practically, I'd love to invite people watching live or watching back. I cannot emphasize enough, really reinforcing Heather's point around, really blending that integration of local and global. We're very privileged to be able to see globally and sense globally now. But when we do it from a place of non-groundedness, it can be a very, very messy experience. Certainly has been for me. So I just want to invite people to really embrace, if you feel moved, being really intentional about that local grounding whilst doing this world work. That's probably an invitation I would offer. And I'd love to pass it over to Heather, if I may. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really love these conversations where we get to remind one another what the stakes are, what we're up against, what our responsibilities are. And it's great, we're coming from all different parts of the world doing this and sharing it with others. So I really appreciate the opportunity to get to have this conversation on a Friday morning. Farzin?
Yeah, one big thing that I appreciate from this conversation that you all reminded me of is that, you're in this moment of we're not doing anything, like we're careening toward. Actually, we're not seeing it here in the global North, Europe, US. There are multiple things happening across the globe that are challenging these things, but there are a few things that make it into our press here. And so kind of recognizing that, like that the fact that there are there are people doing things across the globe to challenge the world order. I think we in the global North need to do more, right? Like we're not like we need to kind of in the center of the imperial power core have to do more to dismantle this system and then provide those avenues for that emergence. And I want to deeply appreciate kind of highlighting those things and kind of bring me back into to reality a little bit. So that was my takeaway, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you, Sahana.
I'm grateful for these spaces where we can have such conversations, where we can hold each other with generosity and curiosity. And also, this what I'm really taking away is this coming together of the collective, wisdom, but also the importance of it starting from the individuals inside out. It's not just it's not just a gathering. It's kind of an inside out process which leads to that gathering, which leads to that, whether we call it movement or whether we call it a little tribe, whatever. And how these happen and where they happen, we can't define or design that in advance. And that very emergent nature requires us to trust that whatever little we are doing as an individual, without guilt and shame, we have been part of the system was created, it is there, and we are part of it. And we are part of it to even survive. I need to make a living, you need to make a living. And in that process, what are some of the choices we can feasibly make as individuals to gradually dismantle the system from the inside? And I'm not saying an uprising, but it's like these little chipping away at an ice block gradually from all corners. And if that's happening, it's almost like after a point, that system itself becomes obsolete. Maybe I'm being utopian, but gradually that's what I'm taking away. Such conversations itself, we wouldn't be having this 5 years ago. So these conversations like these are chipping away at that old story, little by little, bit by bit, in little pockets all over the world. And I think that's a fabulous start. That's what I'm taking away. Thank you, everyone.
Heather, Farzin, Sahana, thank you. And of course, anybody watching us live or watching back, thank you so much. Do check out these amazing humans. Last final bit of pitch, bit of marketing. I'm in sales. So check out Farzin's website, criticalequity.com. Do check out Heather's, keduzi.org, and a new snazzy YouTube channel coming. So do look out for, bit of branding, updated, Heather, something. Check out Keduzi on YouTube. Do check out my good friend Sahana and their amazing writing at her link tree. And you can follow me if you're really, really desperate on medium.com at Garry Turner, thinking partner. And yeah, honestly, this has been amazing. All three of you. Yes, there's work to be done, lots of it inside and outside, but hopefully we're modeling today that we can build those relationships. People are willing to engage if we don't come from a place of extraction and domination. Pretty simple, right? Really? But really complex. So have a great day. See you later, everyone. Take care. Bye.